Let's go and try to have an understanding about what we call social cognition and try to have an understanding about the components and concepts involved in what we call social cognition. One of the first key terms that you might have in your mind that is related to social cognition is what we call empathy. And by empathy, it is not just having understanding about what somebody is feeling right now, but it's also about having the same experience. So it is not just understanding, it's also experiencing. So when we talk about empathy, it also includes experiencing the emotions that others are experiencing. So that is what we call empathy. And it is definitely one of the core building blocks of what we call social cognition. The other term that is critical in terms of having understanding about social cognition are two terms. One is called intention, and the other is about intentionality. And what is the difference between intention and intentionality? How do you differentiate them? What do we call intention? And what is intentionality? And why they are different from each other? Intention is our ability to form an image of a goal state and trying to pursue that goal state. So when we talk about intention, as you remember what we have been discussing from last session in terms of making something like a plan for the future and then trying to get to that specific goal and pursuing that specific goal, that is what we call intention. But by intentionality, we mean that we have an understanding about an intention of others' mind. So we are attributing intention to others. So attributing intention to others would be named as intentionality. And intentionality is going to be critical in terms of the social cognition. You can attribute intention to others people based on the information that you are getting. And the question is how much information we need to have to be able to attribute intentionality. What is the minimum level of information that we need to be able to attribute intentionality? And that's a really important question that people have tried to see. Can we just attribute intentionality to some sort of lines or just simple geographical or kind of simple geometric shapes? Things like a triangle, a square, trying to see if we can make any level of intentionality feeling from really simple stimuli. And people explored that in different studies. In one of the studies by Hyder and Simmel in something like 7 years ago, let me just try to bring this up. Can you see my screen right now? So, as you can see in the screen, there are some lines, okay, and some geometric shapes, okay, triangles and circles. And there is a large triangle and small triangle and a small circle, okay? So you're gonna give me an idea about, can you attribute intentionality or even attribute personality to these geometric shapes? So I'm gonna start from the first part, and sorry for the quality. You can imagine it goes back to something like 7 years ago. Would you just write it down in terms of the feeling that you had for these three elements in the video? And could you attribute any sort of intentionality or even character to those elements? Fearful, aggressive, the big triangle is aggressive, the large triangle is aggressiveness, empathy, angry. Can you see that how much information, personality information or state information, you are referring to these small elements? The level of information that we have is just some movements and really small figures. How this kind of small levels of movements is just being attributed to the intentionality. And it's amazing that how this really simple animation could give you a level of feeling about the intentionality. And even the simple moves that they have been doing in terms of interacting with each other, moving towards each other, moving away from each other, moving around with each other, all those is really a small movements. I highly recommend you to see that video again and see how much even all those really simple movements are going to be important in terms of the intentionality. And people realize that probably the most important factor in terms of the intentionality is related to movement. And any piece that is supposed to be contributing to any sort of movement. So it seems that movement is critical in terms of the intentionality. And that's the reason I will discuss about why intentionality is represented in the brain in different parts, and how that is going to be an important process in the brain, and how brain is processing intentionality. So I highly recommend you to be back and see the video again and see how kind of simple information could give you a sense of intentionality. So now you probably have a better idea about what I mean by intentionality. And so intentionality is something that we perceive from just simple kind of environmental cues, and we can attribute to the other's mind in terms of how kind of intentionality is happening there, or intentions are happening there. The other term is mentalizing, trying to or accepting that others have the sort of mental state, and it's not just an object outside. People around you, they have their own mental state as you have, and they experience what you experience as well. So considering kind of a sort of a level of mental processing in others is called mentalizing. So that is another level of social cognition. And the other level is about what we call subjectivity and intersubjectivity. And by intersubjectivity, what do we mean? We mean that we understand that it is not just ourselves, that we have a sensory processing and a kind of subjective feeling about others, but also about others who have subjective experiences. So what we call intersubjectivity. So let me just try to change the pen. Okay, so intersubjectivity is about how we can feel that others would have subjective experiences as we do. And intersubjectivity is probably another important key term in this field. And at the end, we have what we call theory of mind. And what is theory of mind? When we talk about theory of mind, we are talking about a metacognitive understanding of our own mind as well as minds of others. So whatever we have been discussing in this course was about giving people a metacognitive understanding about what is happening in their brain. But as I discussed with you before, that metacognitive understanding could also be about what is happening in others' mind and how we can process what are the cognitive processes that are happening in their mind. And that is called a metacognition of others. And we probably, the best definition of social cognition is a level of metacognitive understanding of others' mind and how different processes are happening in their brain. And based on that understanding, we can adjust our interaction with others and optimize the relationship that we have with others. That is basically the basis of social cognition. If you remember, we discussed about this model before in terms of different sort of cognitive processing. And if you remember, we discussed about metacognition before, and we discussed that we called metacognition of self as insight and metacognition of others as social cognition. So that is the model that we discussed about before in the first sessions of this class, and we discussed that, okay, what we are talking about, metacognition of others, is what we call social cognition. And in reality, they are highly related to each other. You cannot have an insight about yourself without having understanding what is happening among others. And that is a really great point in terms of why interaction with others is helping us to understand ourselves as well. So we cannot have the level of understanding that we have about ourselves without seeing what is happening among others and how others are processing or dealing with challenges and problems in their daily life. So that is a critical point in terms of being able to have understanding about others, to be able to understand what is happening in your own brain. And over time, one of the things that, what we do basically in psychotherapy, we provide people with this opportunity to use another person to be able to bring them a level of understanding about what is happening in their own mind. So that interaction in what we do in different sort of psychosocial interventions, we provide people with opportunities to be able to understand what is happening in their own mind and in their own brain. And that is the way that we are hopeful that the psychotherapy intervention is going to be effective. Okay, let's go to the more technical details about these key terms that we have been discussing about. So when we want to talk about process of social cognition, first of all, as I told you, we have one component in terms of intentionality detection. And we realize that movements are going to be critically important to attribute intention to others. And the second factor is about eyes and detecting eyes and gaze and face. So basically combining face with movements, we have the first initial step in terms of understanding what is happening outside around us. So these are the first two building blocks of social processing and social cognition. And then after intentionality detection and eye direction detection, the process that we call a dyadic interaction. And by dyadic interaction, we mean that, as you can see here, this is exactly the dyadic interaction that we are, if I go to this, okay. So as you can see here, when two people are just having their gaze in the same direction, this is one level of dyadic interaction, and that's exactly what we do when we just have eye contact with others. And let me just give you, okay, that's exactly one when you kind of interact with just your eyes with a kind of newborn or a 3 months or 6 months or 9 months baby. You can see that in something like even in something like 3 months, a baby could have a level of dyadic interaction. So you can start to kind of interact with eyes, and they can realize that you are just kind of seeing their eyes and interacting with them. So they can differentiate between you looking at them and you not attending to them. And there are studies. I'm not sure how. I do not have enough time for today. But for the next week, I will show you some of those studies in terms of if you give a really kind of something like 3 months old baby 2 different kind of scenarios. In one scenario, mom is just interacting and would have the same the eye contact with the baby, comparing to the scenario that you are in front of the baby without looking at baby and just averting your gaze from baby. And that would make things really frustrating for babies, and they just start to scream, as just kind of just be kind of frustrated with even in a really kind of early age, and realizing that you are averting your eyes from him or her. And that is the really basic cognitive function that kids would start to develop even at something like a 3 months old. And that is amazing how this dyadic interaction work. But another level of interaction is what we call shared attention or shared attention mechanism. Okay, what do we call by shared attention? This is exactly what is happening. We need to have gaze following. So if somebody is looking to the other direction, you start to see that direction as well. So this is what you have experienced definitely before. We call that gaze following. And then you can have joint attention. You both are seeing something together. And then you have a shared attention. What is the difference between shared attention and joint attention? Shared attention means that I'm looking to something. I know that you are looking to that thing as well. And we are all attending to something that is outside our body. So we both are attending to something. So it is not just we are both attending to something. It's also about I know that you are also attending to that specific object outside. And that is what we call shared attention. And it's another thing that kids would start to develop from the age of something like 6 months old. So when they are showing you something and you are following your eyes in terms of are you attending to that object or not, and they try to make sure that you are seeing the ball that they are showing you. So that is called shared attention. And that's a kind of really complex cognitive process in terms of being able to understand that, okay, I'm looking to this, you're also looking to this, and we know that we are both looking to this at the same time. And that is what we call theory of mind. So I know that you have a mental state of attending to this object, and I have the same mental state as well. So this is when we get to the level of that we call theory of mind. So we start from, let's say, intentional detection, eye gaze, and eye detection, eye direction detection. We make a shared attention, and then we develop what we call a theory of mind with what we do mentalizing. So we start to mentalize it. Okay, you are seeing something, you are thinking about something, and now I have the same kind of processes. And you start to think about, okay, if I'm looking to this kind of glass, you are looking to this glass, we are both probably thinking about drinking something inside the glass. So you start to think about, okay, others would have the same mental state as you do, and you start to communicate through that shared mental representation that you have from something that is going to happen outside. Okay? So that is what we call the process of development of theory of mind. The question is, what is the kind of the minimum requirement in the brain to be able to have shared attention? And it's obvious that among other animals, probably the only animals that they have what we call shared attention are great apes. So you do not have shared attention with your dog. You cannot have shared attention with your dog. So when you point them towards something and ask them to go to find something, they do not follow, your let's say your point. And they cannot. It's quite interesting that even in kind of animals like dog, they can detect your eye gaze. So they can have a minimum level of, let's say, just eye gaze detection and something like a dyadic interaction through the eyes. But it is not going to happen to another level of shared attention. So shared attention, it seems that is just going to be related to what we call great apes, that is composed from chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, and bonobos. And these, three groups they call great apes. And if you want to kind of have a better idea about, when we talk about great apes, what are the targets that we are talking about? We have great apes, and we have what we call lesser apes here, and these are basically gibbons, There are lesser apes. And then we have monkeys, and we have two groups of monkeys, old world monkey and new world monkey. For example, those who are in Brazil, they have a specific type of monkey that is called marmoset, which is a new world monkey. I'm not sure if we already have somebody from Brazil here that they can explain us what are the interesting features of these really beautiful small monkeys. It's called marmoset monkeys. And then we have some other groups that are not basically monkeys anymore. So are things like lemurs and the other animals. They are still close to kind of the primates, but they are not even called monkeys. So that is how this group is being labeled and being named. And there are some evolutionary processes. I'm not going to discuss about them today here. But it's amazing that this process is just, we share this shared attention processing with just great apes, and they also have the processing of shared attention. Okay, so let's go to other aspects of Torah. So we are trying to disentangle or dismantle this really complex construct we call social cognition to its components. We have discussed about intentionality, we have discussed about eye detection, eye gaze detection, shared attention, theory of mind, mentalizing. So we are trying to tease apart different components. What are the other aspects of theory of mind that I can add to what we discussed today? Let me just kind of ask you a question. Be ready to answer to this question. This is Anne, this is Sally. So, you can see there are two characters. We have Anne and Sally here. Sally has a ball. She puts it into her basket here. Okay. Sally would leave, and then Anne would bring out the ball and would put it inside the basket. And now Sally is back. Where Sally is going to look for her ball, in the basket or in the box? Just answer in the chat space. Of course, she would look into the basket. And it's amazing that if you start to work with these similar scenarios, even we do that with something like if we put a table, we do the same with the table. If you go at an age of less than something like 4 years old, sometimes kids would not be able to attribute that kind of process. So they just say that, okay, she would look into the let's say into the place that they know that the ball is already here. So that is, and you can imagine that what is really happening in this process when you are doing this specific task in terms of why Anne should basically see the basket, and how kind of attributing a mental state to another object is happening here. So these are called false belief tasks. False belief social tasks that, if we say that, okay, Anne would be seeing this one, it would be a false belief. They still have a false belief that, the ball would be here, but in reality the ball is here. Okay, so as you can see here, it is another concept of social cognition without having very much of let's say eyes and shared attention. So it is it's another level of social cognition that you can see in this Sally and Anne task. If you look into the literature of what they call theory of mind, you can see it's something that has been evolving over time. And one of the reasons that we have a strong evolution in this process and strong interest in doing studies of theory of mind, because people realize that when we talk autistic spectrum, people with autistic spectrum disorder, we are talking about people who have problems with theory of mind tasks, but they can still do very well in their other, let's say, cognitive functions. So their IQ could be normal, but they still have deficits in theory of mind tasks and different versions of theory of mind tasks. And that's a kind of amazing kind of finding in terms of how this specific cognitive function is affected in people with autism and autistic spectrum disorder. But as I told you, there are different tasks for measuring social cognition. I mean, I'm just reviewing what we have discussed so far. So we can use I's task, we can use Sally and Ann task, we can use the animations that we discussed about before in terms of kind of attributing intentionality to the object outside. And then, as you can see here, people are supposed to identify emotion in these tasks, predict the behavior that Anne or Sally are going to do, or just subjectively kind of reporting what is happening. Okay, so there are different, let's say, different versions of these tasks, and there is a kind of a variation in terms of the different tasks that people are discussing and are using in this field. If you are interested to learn more about this, I highly recommend you to read this paper by Ralph Adolph and his colleagues. He's in Caltech, and he's one of the giants in the field. So if I want to kind of name, let's say, two major giants in the field, probably Simon Baron-Cohen is one of the giants, and also Rolf Adolph. He's one of the giants in the field. He's mainly from the emotion side, is contributing to the field of theory of mind and social cognition. Okay, so that was the second part of the discussion, giving you an idea about variation of different tasks and different constructs that are involved in what we call social cognition.